rifle presented to the public was a Mauser 30-06, found abandoned with one spent casing in its chamber and 3 live rounds still in the magazine. Authorities framed it as the murder weapon, but the bullet taken from Charlie Kirk's body has never been confirmed to match this rifle. And that is the problem. Ballistics is simple. A bullet carries the unique markings of the barrel that fired it. If the bullet and the rifle do not align, then the weapon shown is not the weapon used. Without that connection, the rifle is not proof. It is a display, and the truth remains unsettled.
Tonight we open with the single, urgent thread that runs through every document, witness statement, and late-night debate about this case. The physical evidence at the scene, the bullet recovered from Charlie Kirk's body, does not, according to multiple reported sources, line up cleanly with the rifle investigators displayed to the public. That discrepancy is not a minor footnote. It is the hinge on which the entire narrative swings. What follows is an evidence-first, document-driven walkthrough of the exact items, anomalies, and unanswered questions now in the public record. Where something remains an allegation or a reported claim, I will say so plainly. This is not courtroom advocacy. It is a catalog of what must be explained. A bullet tore through Charlie Kirk. A doctor at his side confirmed that fact in the chaotic moments after the shooting. That medical observation, a bullet had entered the body, is the very first, simple truth. From the start, the bullet itself should have been the anchor for every conclusion. Ballistics, autopsy imaging, and a documented chain of custody should have turned that single fact into forensic clarity. Instead, the bullet is now the most contentious and confusing element of the case. Reports indicate it does not match the barrel markings of the rifle presented to cameras as the murder weapon. That reported mismatch raises a sequence of precise, testable questions. Questions that prosecutors, investigators, defense counsel, and oversight bodies must answer. First, the ballistics issue. Forensic ballistics is the method the criminal justice system relies on to connect a projectile to a specific barrel. Every firearm barrel leaves microscopic striations on a bullet it fires. When those striations are compared, a match is either confirmed or not. According to the reporting you provided, forensic experts who have examined the available information say the grooves and markings on the bullet recovered from Kirk's body do not align with the test-fired rounds from the rifle that authorities displayed as the murder weapon. That claim, if substantiated by the signed lab report and comparison plates, would be decisive. If the lab report exists and shows a match, it would end reasonable doubt about the ballistic link. If the lab report shows no match, then the most central forensic claim supporting the prosecution's narrative collapses. Second, the autopsy and trajectory. Medical examiners produce records that are deterministic about wound tracks, entry angle, depth, and whether there is an exit wound. Reports indicate the wound path reported by surgical staff and forensic summaries suggests a trajectory inconsistent with an elevated, rooftop shot. Instead, the wound path, as summarized in some medical accounts, would be more consistent with a shot fired from a closer or more level position, possibly from behind the stage area. Those reports are extremely consequential. If the autopsy imaging and the medical examiner's report show a forward-traveling trajectory inconsistent with a downward, rooftop line of fire, that physical fact must be reconciled with the public assertion of a shooter above. We are not speculating about intent or motive. We are asking whether the medical facts match the spatial claim made by investigators. Third, witness audio and video. In chaotic scenes, human perception is imperfect. But when multiple independent recordings exist, acoustic analysis can triangulate a sound's origin with real precision. Several attendees captured video and audio at the moment of impact. Some witnesses describe the sound as close and immediate, like a shot fired within the room. Others describe it as distant or from above. The key point is this: no authoritative, publicly released acoustic triangulation has been presented that reconciles these differences. If independent audio analysis across original phone files were published, it could either corroborate the rooftop hypothesis or point to a near-stage source. The lack of such an analysis keeps conflicting eyewitness impressions unresolved. Fourth, surveillance and camera anomalies. At a well-planned event of this scale, venue CCTV and adjacent camera systems are primary documentary evidence. Yet the feed that many hoped would provide clarity reportedly went dark at the very moment the shot was fired. Officials have called the outage a technical glitch. Vendors and analysts say the timing is unusual. When a primary camera fails precisely during a critical moment, vendor logs, pan-tilt zoom controller records, and RAW exports become essential. Those records show whether an automated function failed or whether a manual operator made unlogged adjustments. The public has not been shown those logs in a way that dissipates suspicion. That absence must be addressed. Fifth, device and location data for the accused. Reports supplied to the public indicate Tyler Robinson's phone, GPS timestamps, and cell tower pings place him away from the rooftop at the moment the fatal shot rang out. Device telemetry is time-stamped and hard to falsify without access to raw forensic images. If those call detail records and device images truly place Robinson elsewhere, that fact either has to be reconciled with lab ballistics and camera footage, or it forces investigators to reevaluate their scenario entirely. Technology is not persuasive because it is narrative, it is persuasive because it is recorded data. The presence of conflicting device telemetry is not a conclusive exoneration, but it is a hard fact that requires explanation. Sixth, chain of custody and evidence handling. The public saw the dramatic images, agents carrying a Mauser 30-06 bolt-action rifle through trees, the weapon held up like an exhibit. Photographs are persuasive to viewers, but courtroom adjudication depends on documentation. Who found the rifle at what precise coordinates, who signed each evidence tag, and when was the item tested? Chain of custody logs provide those answers. If the ballistics link fails but the chain is pristine, the investigation must explain the origins of the projectile. If the chain shows unexplained gaps, then any lab conclusions are vulnerable to challenge. The public has a right to see those logs in discovery or under appropriate judicial review. Seventh, the unexplained detained individual. Reporting suggests at least one other person was briefly detained and then quietly released the day of the shooting. In chaotic investigations, short detentions are normal. Simple security sweeps can yield detained persons who are quickly cleared. The detail that raises alarm is not the detention itself but the absence of a public record. No booking number, no follow-up, no docket entry. If someone was detained and then erased from the public timeline, investigators must account for that person's identity, the basis for detention, the content of any interview, and the reason for release. Transparency here is not optional, it is fundamental. Eighth, the timeline of public messaging. Authorities moved quickly after the shooting. An arrest, a press conference, images of a rifle, the suggestion of a solved case. That speed afforded citizens a narrative, closure for a shocked public. But speed is not the same as completeness. Medical imaging, ballistics plates, raw audio, video, vendor logs, and device forensics are documents that take time to produce and to analyze. The important question is procedural. Were those documents produced to the defense and to independent experts in timely fashion, or was public messaging prioritized over full disclosure? Where the prosecution seeks severe penalties, courts and the public expect that the forensic foundation be transparent and unambiguous. Ninth, defense strategy and legal choices. Initial defense actions reportedly focused on forensic challenges, the mismatched projectile, chain of custody questions, and device timestamp contradictions. Abruptly, the defense pivoted toward mental health evaluations and negotiation strategies. Observers who expected an aggressive forensic challenge found that shift puzzling. There are possible, legitimate reasons for such a pivot: plea dynamics, client best interests, or tactical deals that preserve later rights. But the reported pivot raises a procedural question. When compelling forensic anomalies exist in the record, why did litigation not foreground them publicly in an evidentiary fight? The reasonable suspicion is not proof of wrongdoing. It is a procedural concern that weighs heavily on public trust. 10th, cumulative pattern. One unexplained failure is concerning. A constellation of unexplained items forms a pattern. The key items in this pattern: a reported ballistics mismatch, an autopsy trajectory that appears inconsistent with the claimed vantage, camera outages timed to the event, device telemetry placing the accused elsewhere, and an erased detained individual, are not isolated curiosities. Together, they require a methodical, open inquiry. The right remedy is documentary. Produce the lab plates, the autopsy imaging, the original audio and video files with metadata, the camera and drone vendor logs, the chain of custody records, and the detention logs. Independent experts should analyze them under court supervision or under protective orders that preserve privacy without obscuring substance. What do each of those documents concretely deliver? If the ballistics comparison plates show a reproducible match between test-fired rounds from the seized rifle and the projectile recovered from Kirk's body, then the central forensic claims supporting the prosecution becomes solid and quantifiable. If the autopsy imaging shows a trajectory consistent with a downward, rooftop shot that corroborates the physical geometry of the alleged crime. If acoustic triangulation across original, unsuppressed recordings converges on an elevated origin, then eyewitness discrepancies can be explained as the confusion of a chaotic event. Conversely, if the comparison plates show no match, if the autopsy imaging shows a forward or level trajectory inconsistent with a rooftop position, if acoustic triangulation points near the stage or behind it, then the case's central forensic pillar is undermined. That would mean the investigation either missed other suspects, relied on incomplete or misleading evidence, or worse, presented a premature narrative before primary forensic validation. Let's be explicit about the legal stakes. The presence or absence of a ballistics match, the clarity of the autopsy trajectory, and the results of acoustic and video analyses are not peripheral details for the courtroom. They are the core of a murder prosecution. For a jury to consider capital or near-capital outcomes, forensic certainty matters. That is why discovery, independent testing, and transparent disclosure are not bureaucratic niceties. They are the procedural protections that ensure accuracy. Now consider the human context behind the documentation. A family grieves. A defendant remains in custody. Investigators face public pressure to produce answers. Media outlets compete for the next dramatic image. That charged environment can produce quick statements meant to reassure. But reassuring statements cannot substitute for rigorous, documented proof. The documents we demand protect both the victim's family by assuring that the real perpetrator is identified and convicted, and the accused by ensuring that the evidence is tested and retested in open, adversarial fashion. What should happen next, step by step? First, the autopsy and medical examiner's imaging should be placed under court-approved review by independent medical experts. If necessary, protective orders can redact identifying medical details while preserving the anatomical information needed for ballistic reconstruction. Second, the ballistics laboratory report must be produced in full, the examiner's signed conclusions, the comparison plates, the test-fire procedures, and any caveats about deformation or comparison limitations. If the projectile is too damaged to compare, that fact should be documented precisely. If a match exists, show it. Third, original attendee audio and video files must be preserved and made available for accredited acoustic analysts to triangulate the shot's likely origin. These analyses are repeatable and scientific. They convert subjective impressions into spatial estimates. Fourth, vendor logs from camera systems and drone telemetry should be obtained. They will show whether cameras were on automated motion detection, whether operators made manual adjustments, and whether any pre- or post-event operator behaviors explain anomalies. Drone telemetry will show altitude and GPS path, which resolves whether the drone could have affected sightlines or audio. Fifth, chain of custody records for the rifle, recovered casings, and the projectile itself must be produced and reviewed. Dates, times, handlers, and lab submission notes are routine in serious homicide inquiries. They should be routine here. Sixth, device forensic images and call detail records for the accused and any other persons of interest should be imaged and made available under the appropriate legal protocols. These records authenticate messages, timestamps, and location data. Seventh, detention and interview logs for any briefly held persons should be produced for in-camera judicial review if privacy is at risk, so a court can assess whether further investigation is warranted. If the legal system operates as designed, the defense will have access to these materials in discovery, independent experts will test them, and courts will rule on admissibility and weight. That is how truth emerges, through procedural rigor, not through the theater of press conferences and staged photographs. We must also address a more uncomfortable, systemic question that the pattern of anomalies provokes. When high-profile crimes occur under intense public scrutiny, there is enormous pressure on investigators and officials to show the public that the system works. That pressure can unintentionally favor speed over completeness. The solution is not to criticize speed per se, but to insist that speed be accompanied by immediate and transparent availability of core forensic documents to the defense and to independent oversight. Transparency reduces the incentive to substitute optics for evidence. Let me be clear about what I am not claiming. I am not asserting guilt or innocence. I am not advancing a conspiracy theory. I am cataloging specific, documented discrepancies that, taken together, require documentary resolution. When technical records contradict public claims, the remedy is documentary disclosure and independent analysis. Everything I have described tonight is testable and resolvable. Science thrives on evidence, not on innuendo. If the records, autopsy imaging, ballistics plates, acoustic triangulation, chain of custody logs, device forensics, and vendor telemetry are consistent with the prosecution's theory, then the case's forensic foundations will be strengthened and the public can move toward closure. If the records contradict the prosecution's claims, then investigators must follow where evidence leads, which may include reopening lines of inquiry, identifying additional suspects, or adjusting charges. What citizens and journalists can do right now is practical and immediate. If you were at the event and preserved original video or audio files, keep them intact. Do not re-encode or upload a compressed version. Metadata and timestamps are essential. If you are a journalist, file targeted records requests and ask for lab case numbers, examiner names, autopsy identifiers, and camera vendor logs. If you are an attorney representing parties in the case, move aggressively in discovery for the materials described here and consider independent testing under court supervision. At the heart of this matter is a civic principle: accountability demands documentation. The essential question posed by the evidence is simple to state and hard to resolve. Did the projectile that killed Charlie Kirk come from the rifle presented to the public, or did it come from another barrel, perhaps another weapon entirely? The answer to that question is not an opinion to be traded on social media. It is a conclusion to be drawn from lab plates, from imaging, from synchronized audio and video, and from well-documented chain of custody. Until that documentary record is produced and independently reviewed, the public is entitled to reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt is the legal standard for criminal adjudication. In public discourse, reasonable doubt is also the requisite for informed judgment. When major inconsistencies exist in the public record, the responsible public response is not to leap to conspiratorial certainty but to demand the documents that resolve the uncertainty. One final point about respect for victims and process. Families deserve answers and closure. The community deserves a trustworthy investigative process. The accused deserves rigorous, transparent testing of all evidence. The only way to serve all three is to commit to full disclosure of the core documents and to independent analysis under judicial safeguards. Anything less leaves room for lingering suspicion and for the corrosive politics of rumor. We will continue to follow every filing, every lab report, and every disclosure motion. When the autopsy images, ballistics plates, and raw surveillance files enter the record, they will be analyzed and explained in plain terms. Until then, insist on records, not rhetoric. Insist on the documents that convert conjecture into conclusion. If you have original, time-stamped video or audio from that event, preserve it. If you want independent analysis, supply it to an accredited newsroom or to counsel who will protect chain of custody. This story will not be resolved by headlines alone. It will be resolved at the intersection of science and procedure. Tonight's record is simple. A doctor confirmed a bullet struck Charlie Kirk. Subsequent reporting alleges that projectile does not match the barrel of the rifle presented to the public. That allegation demands documents. Produce the records. Let the experts test them. Let the law and the science decide.